that Adult Ed starts again on Wednesday evening. So we're hoping to see you. It will be digital for the next few weeks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other announcements? All right. Any dedications this morning? Go ahead, Greg.
I'd like to dedicate this. This is the yard site of Barry Josephson, a longtime member of this group, passed several years ago. Incredible man. He used to help lead the Saturday morning services. I'd like to dedicate this to his memory.
All right. An important memory to keep going. Anyone else have a dedication this morning?
Rabbi Miriam, I do. I'd like to dedicate this to the two people that I love who are currently going through chemotherapy and wish them a refuah shlema.
And refuah shlema to them. And as we hold those need of healing in our hearts, that we remember that when two people study Torah together, God's presence, Shekhinah, comes down and dwells with us. So says our tradition. And that is a healing power, even if it might be healing of the body, but certainly healing of the spirit. So we invite down the Shekhinah to join us this morning for our Torah study as we join together in the blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. Our Torah portion today is Vaera, and we are going to start with chapter 7. So in the Torah Woman's Commentary, which is what I have in front of me, that's page 337. We can start chapter 7, verse 1, and I'm actually going to use Sefaria this morning to navigate through our portion. So I'm just going to copy, hold on, where I am in case you want to follow along. I happen to have Rashi up on the sidebar, which is always interesting and helpful in a very traditional way to study Torah. Here we go. There's the Sefaria link. And in preparation for our Torah study this morning, here is the link to our, and I'm going to make it so you guys can find it. That is a link to our study sheet. And we are going to start halfway through the study sheet. We're going to start with Pharaoh's hardened heart and not so much the crushed spirits, which are mentioned also in the title of this sheet. So for those of you who want to kind of find where we are going to start, basically we're going to start at reading 24, although we'll go up a bit. So now that I have kind of oriented us, do I have some volunteer readers this morning? All right, Linda, Marion, and anyone else? Am I missing someone? Barbara. All right, let me put you guys down. Linda, Marion, Barbara. We'll go in that order. There's that. And I'm going to unmute the Miller household and share, bring back up. Good. I'm going to share my screen and feel free to follow along with whatever Torah or Chumash you have in front of you. Please, as always, in particular this morning, more than other mornings, various translations will add to our discussion. So go ahead, Linda.
And somebody can point where in the new plow that is as well, since that's what we have at home.
I will look that up while you read. How's that?
Thank you. The Lord replied to Moses, "See, I place you in the role of God to Pharaoh, with your brother Aaron as your prophet. You shall repeat all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall speak to Pharaoh to let the Israelites depart from his land. But I will
all right, we're going to stop right there.
Okay. Thank you.
Never mind. Please continue. Please
Okay.
you know what,
But
we're
I
gonna
will-
go
but I-
through verse 6, and then we'll
Okay.
come back and probably spend our whole time on this. Go ahead.
But I will harden Pharaoh's heart that I may multiply my signs and marvel in the land of Egypt. When Pharaoh does not heed you, I will lay my hand upon Egypt and deliver my ranks, my people, the Israelites, from the land of Egypt with extraordinary chastisements. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand over Egypt and bring out the Israelites from their midst.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much for that reading. And now I'm going to leave it up for a moment.
323, she says.
And I have the travel size, but I think the numbers are the same, and I have 384. So it's one of those two. All right, go ahead, Kathy.
Probably 384.
In verse 1, in this version, it said, I have set you something as God. And in altar, it says a God, small g.
Ooh, we spent actually a significant amount of time on this last year. And I have pulled up my my midrash that I had that was not available in Sefaria. So if people want to explore this, but what is this God do Pharaoh business? And I think let's go here. We can have Rashi and Ibn Ezra's commentary on the side note too. What do you guys think? What's this God to? I shall make you as God to Pharaoh. What do you think that's about?
Well, this says in the role of God. So maybe I understand being a God to Pharaoh because Pharaoh is considered a God. So he's putting him on equal basis.
Aha. So part of this is, so maybe this is putting him equal footing to Pharaoh.
Yeah, they stuck the preposition or the not preposition of God instead of just God. So in altar, it's a small g, but they don't say of God. See, I have set you as a God to Pharaoh.
Right. And that is a God is probably more accurate, right? But because there's no ha. On the other hand, it is Elohim, which is the plural and is only usually singular when referring to God. So it's a little unclear. I will give you as a God to Pharaoh. So there does seem to be, and the word here, the verb is look. So there's an implication of perception here. To Pharaoh, he will be God, but the word is the specific name of God, one of the specific names of God, Elohim.
Yeah, Stone uses master.
So clearly our commentators are really disturbed by this and are not translating it quite literally. Jim.
I have the Chabad translation, and it says, see, I have made you a lord over Pharaoh. Doesn't say anything about God. Right,
but literally it's gods. I made you like God or gods to Pharaoh. Yes. So so what does it mean? So this is a translation, right? That gives an interpretation.
The verse starts with, the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you a lord over Pharaoh. So there's an agreement in semantics of the word that was chosen. It doesn't, they're pretty literal in their interpretation of the Talmud. So it doesn't say anything about God.
Excellent. So here you have Rashi, who kind of avoids commenting on this, but does do the next level, which is, and Aaron shall be thy prophet, right? So you shall be God and Aaron your prophet. So one way of understanding this, according to Rashi, is that a prophet interprets a God. So Aaron is interpreting Moses, but it's still kind of weird language. So another suggestion is Kathy's, which is putting God and Moses on equal footing with Pharaoh, who believes he's a God and is seen as a God. Other thoughts or interpretations? Linda.
So in Plout, which I thought was interesting, when it talked about my ranks,
Mhm.
my army, and it says something about this concept has entered into the name of the Christian organization Salvation Army. I didn't
Mm.
know if you wanted to comment on that, because
Which has a marching.
which, by the way, has a marching band in the Rose Parade today, as is Jesus, by the way.
It all comes back, right? Yes.
And then Jesus, by the way, has a float in the parade today as well, which was a little surprising.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know. Just letting you know, I think we need to get a presence there for next year. I didn't know where that Salvation Army concept came in.
So which verse are you seeing? I'm missing it. Which verse are you
Where
seeing?
it says
rank in?
rank, so it's verse 4.
Okay. And deliver
army.
my ranks, my people, the Israelites. Most, yeah. So here's, so this is one of the few times that a people, a human group is referred to as God's army, host. So sometimes it's translated as host, right? Sometimes rank, sometimes host. It does have a military context, but often it refers to like the divine, not quite pantheon, but divine ranks that accompany God. In other words, often interpreted as the angels. So hosts is often you hear, and we use this phrase, or this phrase appears in the quote from Genesis that introduces the Shabbat Kiddush. And so, this leads to all sorts of ideas of angels and ranks, and the Catholic Church took this to a whole different level of hierarchy of God and angels. But mostly Jews didn't do that, although there's a lot of play with the angels and the hosts in kind of Jewish midrash. But here, this is specifically the Israelites, right? This is referring to God's people. We are God's host. So that's super interesting. I did not realize Salvation Army came from this phrase here, but it certainly has that implication that this people is God's people that's doing something in the world for God. And let me see if legions, thank you, is what Stone says. And altar has battalions. You can hear there is a military resonance here to this word. So that's another good question about what's going on there. So before we get there, let's stick for a moment. Any other comments or thoughts about a god? It shall make you a god to Pharaoh. All right, so let me go back up. I want to give us two more interpretations with no solid answer. So Ibn Ezra says, I will have elevated your status to that of, in Pharaoh's eyes, your status to that of an angel. That is what God's stead means. So in other words, here we go. On Elohim, meaning an angel. So another way of interpreting Elohim is one of the divine beings. God speaks to the prophet, and the prophet speaks to the men of his generation, meaning that is what Aaron is doing. So this interpretation by Ibn Ezra, who is a very good, close reader, and is the rabbinic commentator most likely to land in the contextual understanding of the Bible, he interprets this as an angel, but of equal status to Pharaoh. So along with the lines of what Kathy said, and then we have Midrash Shemot. Let me just change, and it's very long, but the rabbis really play and explore this idea of I shall make you like a god to Pharaoh. And they argue in this midrash that it is a comeuppance to Pharaoh. So Pharaoh had the gall to claim divinity, and anyone who exalts themselves too high, God will put down. And the way that God puts down Pharaoh is by putting Moses, who Pharaoh sees as a slave, as a god above Pharaoh. So it is a comeuppance to Pharaoh. So there's our very, very long midrash that gives us 4 kings that exalted themselves too high. So let's go back. Any other comments, questions, responses to these interpretations I have shared on this relationship of God, of Moses to Pharaoh and Aaron to Moses? All right, great. So, oh, no, Greg, go ahead.
Just, I think we'll see as this plays out, but there's an implication here that we're setting Moses is the role of God, Aaron is the role of prophet. So it appears as if the plan is Moses will speak to Aaron, Aaron will then speak to Pharaoh. Because we've set up this
Hierarchy.
Yes.
yes.
Yep. That is absolutely a hierarchy. And someone commented, I think it was a Rashi comment, but I've lost it. Maybe it was Ibn Ezra. Every time that Moses speaks to Pharaoh, it's actually Aaron, even if the text doesn't specify it. That's what one of the commentators interpreted from this moment. So, and another interpretation is that Moses has said over and over, I have uncircumcised lips, right? And so, I don't want to steal someone's thunder, but so Steve, I'm going to stop talking. I missed your hands up. Go ahead, Steve.
That's what I was going to remark on, is that Moses has said, I can't talk publicly because I have this speech impediment. And the other thing that's important here, in my view, is that Moses says, or God says to Moses, you will repeat everything I say. So, and so it's really just, it's a mechanical relationship to impress Pharaoh, which is Kathy's point, I think, that Moses is not really a God. He's just simply the conduit for God's words, and he can't speak them publicly because he has this impediment. And he says this to his brother Aaron, as Aaron says to Pharaoh.
And it also gives a like an entourage to Moses to kind of to give a sense of importance that Moses is not going alone, but he has someone who speaks. He's so important. He has someone else who speaks for him. So yes, you have both things happening. One hand, Aaron is almost like a cane for Moses's verbal limp, right? Enabling him to speak eloquently by not speaking, and being interpreted. Greg, is that, wait, I'm sorry, Steve, did that kind of capture what you were saying, or did I miss the point?
No, absolutely.
Okay, go ahead, Greg.
I'm thinking, Moses grew up within Pharaoh's household. Pharaoh would be used to his stutter. What?
It's not the same.
Oh, we've got a machloket here.
Yes, I agree with you, Jim, in terms of, I guess it is a little more powerful to have it more clear coming through Aaron, but I just find it an interesting tension.
It is. All I was saying was it wasn't the same Pharaoh that Moses grew up with.
Yeah, there is an interpretation along those lines, particularly since the part that we skipped said that they were in their 80s, Moses and Aaron. So
yeah,
yes.
So we would. It can't be the same. It can't be the same Pharaoh.
Even if it's not the same Pharaoh, you'd think they'd grown up in the household together.
We're into not only a question of timing, but a question of, let's say for the sake of argument that Greg is right and it's the same Pharaoh. So what is the impact of Moses coming back after years away and not speaking with a stutter, but having someone speak for him? What do you think that impact might be? I think it's worth exploring that proposal. All right. Well, we're going to leave that thought there. Let that mull as we continue looking. Oh my gosh. I love that comment that Steve Edwards just put in the chat. The stutter is about Moses, but not about Pharaoh. It is Moses that is embarrassed, even if others are used to it. Plus, the household of the Egyptian court was so huge. So who knows if Moses had any real relationship with Pharaoh, which is very true and probably would have been understood by the biblical readers. But we might not know that for sure. So, all right. So I'm going back to our text, and we've gotten through Moses and Aaron is his prophet, and Aaron shall repeat everything. Now let's move on to, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt. So I actually want to spend our morning, the remaining almost hour of it, on this concept of God saying to Moses and Aaron before the interactions have really started, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And the word here, so I'm going to actually, rather than telling you, do we have, is David here? Do we have any of our Hebrew experts who know what that word is that is used here for harden? Okay. So if we go into, we're going to switch windows. I'm sorry, I have to move my bar. I only have one screen this morning, zooming from home. So here is my nice little text sheet. And here is our verses. I will harden Pharaoh's heart. So the phrase that is used for harden is akshe, which means literally make hard. That's the root for hard. And what's unusual, now that I've told you this, is that is almost never the word that is actually used in the narrative to follow. So here we have God saying, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs. And there's no objection, right? This is just what God is doing. So what do you guys think of that? All right, Steve.
So when something is not fully formed, it's soft. And then when something hardens, it changes its intended structure. So from that, I could say that God is saying that Pharaoh has an evil heart, and he's simply allowing Pharaoh's heart to find its final form. And God knows what that form is because God does everything. But the part that troubles me about that analysis is the next part, which he says, so that I can multiply my miracles in the land of Egypt, which sounds to say, well, look, I'll not let him respond the way a normal human being responds, so I can show off to everybody.
Great. And you have just named for us the moral tension of this entire part of Exodus, and that is captured. And I love this concept of a hardening is coming into one's own. So we could interpret this as Pharaoh coming into his own, although it's very specifically saying, God saying, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. So is God bringing Pharaoh into his fullness, or is God taking away Pharaoh's free will? And the next sentence implies, or the next clause implies, that God is taking away Pharaoh's free will in order to show off, in order to achieve something, achieve wonders, that an extraordinary chastisement, so that the Egyptians shall know that I am God. So here, I'm going to share my screen again. Here we go. So, right, so that the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. I am Adonai, when I stretch out my hand over Egypt and bring out the Israelites from their midst. What it doesn't say here is that there will be 10 plagues. It says that, but there does say that God will harden Pharaoh's heart. So we are going to look at this and at the struggle that the commentators had with what this means. So I'm debating, I think what I'd like to do before reading all the commentators and is look at the other times in our portion where Pharaoh's heart stiffens or becomes hard. So okay, so next up on my, let's see who our next reader was. I think it was Miriam. Is that right? Let's see, going up. This is why I did the nice little lines. Yes, so Miriam, I'm going to ask you to read these, starting with 29. This is we're taking a little bit out of context, but I'm pulling from our Torah portion. And those of you who have the text can follow along and kind of skim to get there if you can. So this is the first warning before the first plague ever starts, right? That Moses and Aaron gave to Pharaoh. So will you please read reading number 29 for us, please, Miriam?
Okay, I'd like to make a comment first.
Yes.
Because I don't like this whole setup that God is doing.
All right.
Okay. All right. Yes, Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as the Lord had said.
Okay. So so we're going to come back to it, but here we have a different root. So we had hardened, and in English, it's hardened, stiffened, they sound like synonyms. But the root for hardened, for stiffened here is not hard, but strong. So the root is strong. So Vayechazek lev Pharaoh, Pharaoh's heart was made strong. So if we look at, in fact, now I'm going to scroll up. You might want to close your eyes so you don't get, nausea. But if we look at earlier, we did have this word. God said, I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, which is not what happens in the previous portion. We look elsewhere where this root appears in a similar form. It means strengthen, not harden, right? Not stiffen. And in fact, the idea of strengthening person's heart. So now we're going to look at, will you please read for us 23, reading 23, which is a commentator.
I will strengthen his heart. One way to understand this is that a person strengthens his heart to endure suffering in order to stand his ground.
All right, so pause just a moment there. That is the normal meaning of strengthen your heart. Okay, so that's taken out of context, in other words, for this portion. So keep going, please.
In any case, all this time, Pharaoh doesn't see or appreciate God's wonder and how it is done. He is not impressed by anything except, it's very small for me, except
all right, let me see if I can,
itself.
I'm going to make it bigger. Is that better?
Okay. In any case, all this time, Pharaoh doesn't see or appreciate God's wonder and how it is done. He is not impressed by anything except torment itself. So, God was concerned that when God would do the plagues before him, he would become even more impressed, and he would soften his heart immediately out of fear rather than conviction. Because of this, God promises Moses that he will strengthen Pharaoh's heart each time.
Remember, so this is a commentator on Exodus chapter 4, when God promises to strengthen Pharaoh's heart. So apologies about the translation. It's mine, so it's not the smoothest, but it's important because Hamek Davar brings in this understanding, and yet it's stuck in the same place we are of why God is saying that God will strengthen or harden his heart. So now I'm going to scroll down back to this place. And this is exactly what it seems like Ha'emek HaDavar is talking about, because the context is the wonders that were not the plagues, right? So so just now that I have highlighted where we are going, we are now going to switch back. I hope you're not getting whiplash from all my switching back and forth. So I'm going to ask Kathy, who's my reader? Linda. No, who's my reader next? Barbara. Barbara. I'm going to ask Barbara to read for us the context in which Pharaoh's heart is strengthened. So here we go. And please pick up with verse 10. And is it big enough for you? I can make it even larger.
Make it a little bigger, please. Or I could read it out of the New Plout.
That's fine too.
So Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh and did just as the Eternal had commanded. Aaron cast down his rod in the presence of Pharaoh and his courtiers, and it turned into a serpent. Then Pharaoh, for his part, summoned the sages of his sorcerers, and the Egyptian magician priests in turn did the same with their spells. Each cast down his rod, and they turned into serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed their rods. Yet Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as the Eternal had said.
Okay, excellent. So now let's go. I'd like you to continue, because we've looked at this meaning of Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and read for us the next 14. Next verse, 14. Yeah.
And the Eternal One said to Moses, Pharaoh is stubborn. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is coming out to the water, and station yourself before him at the edge of the Nile, taking with you the rod that turned into a snake. And say to him, the Eternal, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you to say, let my people go, that they may worship me in the wilderness. But you have paid no heed until now. Thus said the Eternal, by this you shall know that I am the Eternal. See, I shall strike the water in the Nile and with the rod that is in my hand, and it will turn into blood, and the fish of the Nile will die. The Nile will stink, so that the Egyptians will find it impossible to drink the water of the Nile.
All right, let's stop there. Thank you very much, Barbara. Go ahead, Greg.
I just want to comment that there's, again, an interesting tension here between earlier, God says, I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and it's God's action.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into the story, and it's not necessarily clear, if you hadn't read the earlier part, that it was God stiffening Pharaoh's heart. It was just happening.
Mm-hmm.
It was part of Pharaoh's nature in and of itself, not something that God was forcing him into.
Great. So that is exactly right, and it is the leeway that we might find to make an argument of what is God talking about? Is God talking about this moment? Did God harden Pharaoh's heart now, or is this Pharaoh's actions? Bruce.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Well, Happy New Year. I just want to sort of widen the lens. You know, we keep thinking that this is between Moses and Pharaoh, this back and forth. But there are a lot of other people around. There are Egyptians, there are Jews, there are lots of other people that are watching this. And I think their hearts are also hardened, they're stiffened. And, you know, in this whole process, Moses is also trying to convince the Israelites that, you know, you should come with me. And this, you know, and I really am your leader. And they're not convinced at this point. They need convincing as much as the Egyptians do and as much as Pharaoh does. So this is a show for much more than just Pharaoh. And it's about everyone's heart being strengthened, either to leave Egypt or to decide what the next step is. And I think that that's why there's this long process and why there's 10 plagues. It's not, we can't like just do this overnight. Everyone needs to be convinced, not just Pharaoh.
All right, Steve.
And picking up a little bit more on what Bruce just said is maybe this the broader, there's even broader context, which is divine justice. I mean, the Egyptians really dealt the Israelites a bad card. I mean, the Israelites didn't deserve what they got, and this is God's punishment on the Egyptians. It's, you know, you can't, you do something bad, you can't then say, okay, I escaped punishment because I changed my mind. My you know, oh yeah, I'm sorry. So this is part of God's maybe far be it for me to know what God's plan is, but maybe this is God's plan to punish the Pharaoh and the Egyptian people for what they did to the Israelites.
So there maybe this is not so much about Pharaoh. So in the particular, see, the two of you are saying similar things, but looking at different peoples.
Right.
Maybe this is retribution.
Yeah.
For the horrible treatment that Pharaoh did to the Israelites and that the Egyptians did to the Israelites, right? So it took a people, not just their ruler, to make that happen. Okay, all right. So now let's look a little bit at that phrase, right? So here we have, let me just share my screen again. Sharing screen. So the phrase here, Pharaoh is stubborn and refuses to let the people go, right? So this is what we just read. Kaved lev paro. Pharaoh is stubborn. So I'm going to show you something similar. So kaved lev, think about that. Going back to Exodus 4, the previous chapter, when God and Moses were having this conversation, right? In the previous chapter, previous portion. And Moses says to God, please, oh God, Adonai, I have never been a man of words, either in times past or now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Kavad pei uchvad lashon. Same word in that as an adjective that Moses uses to describe his mouth and his tongue as is used to describe Pharaoh's heart. So what can we learn about Pharaoh's heart or Moses' speech from this idea that it's the same adjective, that the root is heavy, but here it's interpreted as slow in regard to Moses' speech. Moses' mouth is slow and his tongue is slow, my tongue is heavy, or my tongue is slow, or my tongue is dull. So what does that say about Pharaoh's heart, that it's the same adjective? Not just a way of saying it's not working right. It's not functioning correctly. Okay, any other thought?
Marion's hand is up.
Oh, Marion, thank you. Thank you, Barbara. You have to accept the unmute. You're still muted, Marion. Nope. All right, let me try. Oh, there you go.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they both have an impediment. The heart in the case of Pharaoh and the physical impediment of the tongue and the mouth in the case of Moses. And the takeaway from, maybe I'm jumping ahead too far. The takeaway from this for me is, if you have done evil things to a people, and there will be retribution, what does that mean for the American history where the blacks were oppressed and now the whites should be punished severely?
Ooh, it's hard not to read into this story, our own story. Other thoughts about, so not functioning correctly. You said something, Marian, about previous actions and the impact it has on the heart, right? So maybe there is a loss of functioning of Pharaoh's heart, which is several of the interpretations on that source sheet. Although Ibn Ezra calls us on that and says the heart was not seen as a seat of emotion, right? That is, Pharaoh's empathy was dead, but rather the seat of personality and intellect. So something is not working right with Pharaoh's self. Pharaoh's mind, because that was what the heart was understood to be in this portion, and in Pharaoh's response to the miracles of the serpent swallowing up the other serpents that God showed to him. So let's keep going, but we're gonna skip around so that we're not I don't want to get bogged down in the plagues themselves. I want to stick with this idea of the heart. Yes, Steve, you see that accepting the unmute works. Did that work? Let's try again. There we go.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Happy New Year.
I just wanted to comment that apparently even a disability can be turned into an ability.
Wait, say more.
Depending, well, I mean, in Moses's case, his disability, which he resists using, is turned into something that is useful in the service of God. Whereas in Pharaoh's case, it goes the other direction. So it becomes worse, whether it's God or Pharaoh that's doing the stiffening or the hardening, or the strengthening, for that matter. And I wanted to make another point in the. I'm sure this has been made before, but in the sense of the retribution that is coming. The final plague is the killing of the firstborn of Egypt. But it seems to me that's somewhat symmetrical with that. The entire thing that starts this off is Pharaoh's decision to kill the firstborn or the male children of the Israelites. That seems like divine retribution in kind.
Yes, there's definitely a parallelism there. Say more about how Moses's kaved pev kavad lashon, his slow or heavy mouth and tongue, was turned into an ability. How was that made an asset?
Well, it's not that it's by in itself an asset, but Moses overcomes his own hesitancy to become the mouthpiece of God. I mean, it's in part through Aaron, but Moses speaks as well and acts on behalf of God. And it's his ability to overcome his lack of desire to use that especially that handicapped part of his personhood in the service of God.
Okay. There's some provocative thoughts and questions there. So let's stick with this idea of Moses's disability and Pharaoh's disability, and how they both change, and what the impetus was, and how they were strengths or weaknesses. Jim.
Well, Moses, as Steve Edwards had said before, and now Steve Sloan has reiterated, Moses was and is known. Moses is the most humble figure. And if he's going to be a leader of people, the tricks that God initially said for Moses to perform, Pharaoh's necromancers, Pharaoh's magicians could equal them, throwing down the serpents and things like that. So that wasn't going to gain him eyes with the Israelites. It's not so much the focus on Pharaoh, but I see it more as the interpretation of how is he going to emerge as a leader of the people. So he has to a certain degree, he has to overcome his lack of either speech impediment or his slowness of speech, reactionary, because soon after, but one of the reasons he went away, he's not slow of action if he's slow of speech. So we had to reconcile the two, because he, saw what was happening to two of his brethren and kill the Egyptian. So spontaneous action-wise, he's totally capable, but of speech and leading people, he may not have been as developed at that point.
So it's there's a contrast here actually between Pharaoh, whose actions are so harmful, and the opposite of righteous, right? Evil, Pharaoh, Harashah, evil Pharaoh, right? Who is easy of speech and gives orders quickly and says a whole lot. And even if it's whether it's one or two pharaohs in the beginning of the book of Shemot, and both the first portion and our portion today, he has a lot to say, and more than you typically find in a narrative. So he speaks easily, he gives orders easily, but his heart is kavad. His heart is heavy, his heart is slow, his heart doesn't work properly, as opposed to Moses, who can act righteously and act out of a place of compassion and righteousness, but doesn't feel comfortable speaking and talking. So I also, Steve Sloan, I've been thinking about what you've been saying about God turning Moses's disability into an ability by turning him to a God to Pharaoh by giving him a prophet. So there is in kind of a core, the next step of what I just said of Pharaoh being exalted too high. Here, this very humble person is lifted up above Pharaoh, and he has his entourage. And his entourage includes his brother Aaron, which the text kind of indicates is probably more known and more respected in the community than Moses is, right? So there is some indication in the text that Aaron and Miriam were respected leaders within the Israelite community as they were slaves. So there is his unwillingness to talk actually enables God to lift up another leader, and they're collaborating. Great. Before I call on Bruce, Steve Edwards, can you share what you just put in the chat too, please?
I was just thinking more about the word heavy, because it can mean different things in different contexts. If we're trying to measure forward progress, more weight on the person moving forward makes it more difficult to achieve that process. But if you're talking about the result, more weight could mean more significance, more depth, more importance. Mm-hmm. So maybe the same word heavy as applied to different people could have a different context. Maybe Pharaoh's heart was heavy, meaning it impeded his ability to move forward in the context of what God saw as important, whereas his speech was heavy, but when he was able to speak, the results were more important.
They were weighty words.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Bruce.
I'm just going to add to this whole thing about the speech impediment. I sort of like it because then he's not a conduit. It's not like God's mouth speaking through Moses, and you don't get an evangelist. I mean, he doesn't look at, here's an 80-year-old man, came out of the desert, does not probably look too good. It's not very convincing looking, and he's old, and he came out of nowhere. We're not sure if people knew who he was or didn't know who he was. And he could barely speak. So we've really overemphasized the fact that he must be a messenger of a message from God, because why else would he's not looking the part and not sounding the part, and that makes it even more so that he doesn't even sound the part, that he's not just speaking God's words, because God wouldn't have an impediment.
Yeah, so what a contrast. Yes, with Pharaoh and his dignity. Okay. Who would like to continue reading for us as we continue to see what happens to Pharaoh's heart, because now we are entering the plagues. Excellent, Kathy. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. And again, right now I'm going from my study sheet, because I've gathered these the words in different places, but you can follow along if you have the Torah, if you have Safari open, and skim to get where we're going. So this is in response to the very first plague, blood. Go ahead, Kathy, for reading 31. And do you need me to make it larger before you start? I start.
I'm sorry?
Do you need me to make this larger?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
But when the Egyptian magicians did the same with their spells, Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as the Lord had spoken. Pharaoh turned and went into his palace, paying no regard even to this.
Great. So there's a lot of really powerful verbal language here. So again, we have this idea of the heart stiffening, and now the word is the word strengthened, right? Vayechazak le Pharaoh. Pharaoh's heart grew strong. Pharaoh's heart strengthened, or Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed, he did not listen. So, and then Pharaoh turned away, and think about all of the power of turning toward and turning away, and paid no regard. Below, shat libo gam lazot. He did not place his heart on this. And even though it's a different word, it's very similar to the Hebrew sim lev, to pay attention. So his heart didn't regard it. His heart ignored it. So we have the word heart appearing twice here. So what do you guys think of what's going on here? Any nuances that are worth pulling out? Alter said toughen and did not take to heart. Is that your interpretation, Kathy?
No, that was at the end of the verse.
That was Alter's interpretation.
And Pharaoh turned and came into his house, and this too he did not take to heart.
Aha.
So we're still talking
Alter
about the heart.
in the heart.
Yeah.
All right. Any thoughts about what's going on here? All right. Those of you who are following along, it's worth noticing that Pharaoh never asked for this plague to be stopped. So in the retelling of the plagues, we often think each time Pharaoh repented, but Pharaoh does not. Pharaoh does not, shat-lev, does not take this to heart. And so immediately we have an upping of the stakes, which is the frogs. So Kathy, do you want to read for us again? This is we're jumping, folks, to Exodus 8, verse 11. And I'm going to share my screen again. Feel free to read from your own book in front of you, or from reading 32 here, Exodus 8, verse 11.
But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he became stubborn and would not heed them, as the Lord had spoken. Okay, so here we very clearly have something interesting happening. Pharaoh does this to his own heart. V'hachbed et libo. Pharaoh makes his heart heavy. Okay, so this is after the frogs. Pharaoh asks for relief, and then once he gets it, he does do it. He chooses to make his heart chabed, heavy. What do you guys think about that? All right, let's keep going then. So we're going to go on to the next plague, which is lice. And we're moving to 4 verses down, Exodus 8, verse 15. And Kathy, thank you for continuing to be our reader.
And the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he would not heed them, as the Lord had spoken.
Okay, so here we have again the stiffening, which is making strong. And again, we have Pharaoh not asking for relief. So now we've had twice where Vayechazak lev paro, that Pharaoh's heart was made strong, was stiffened, being associated with a time when he doesn't ask for the plague to relent. Steve Edwards, go ahead.
There's this weird progression with the plagues where, Moses does his thing, and Moses and Aaron do their thing, and then the magicians replicate it. So Pharaoh kind of shrugs it off. Then with the frogs, the magicians can do it, but Pharaoh asks for relief. Then he goes back on his deal. And then on the lice, the magicians say, "We can't do it."
Right. So
what is that? What's that all about?
Right. What do you guys think? And not only that, there's this interesting thing that's going on here where God is showing God's majesty by doing these wonders, and the magician priests copy it, but they can't undo it.
Right.
So how idiotic of Pharaoh and the priest to think like, oh, let's show how great we are, and they're damaging their country, right? They're turning the Nile to blood, and everything's dying and stinking, and then they're creating more frogs. And the part that I skipped is when the relief was granted, it wasn't full relief. They stopped the frogs hopping up, but the frogs just all died and stunk up the place. Right? It's disgusting. So what is Pharaoh and his priests thinking about, like, they're not stopping these folks. So there is, and so then this next progression is this is the first time that the light with the lice, where the dust becomes lice, that they can't replicate it. So there is absolutely a progression going on. Thank you for raising that, Dave. Kathy.
It also it reminds me more of in lying. If you tell a little lie and you get away with it, or you get put in, you're questioned, and so you do a bigger lie, and it just progresses to bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's almost like that's what's happening with the plagues. Okay, if this little one doesn't work, let's try something bigger, or let's, that kind of thing.
Okay. Bruce, was that a thought?
Yeah. I didn't catch this in the interpretation we read, but I'm reading Hertz, and Hertz says that it was the finger of God they finally figured out. And I thought that was really interesting. It says, then the magician said unto Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. Like now we're really personal. God's like, all right, now I'm getting personal with you.
Yes. And the phrase they use is Etzba Elohim He. So this is Elohim is the word used, which is the same word that is used for Moses becoming like a god to Pharaoh, right? But the name of God here is Adonai, Yud He Vav He. So this is the divine finger, and it's so interesting that they use the word finger of God, because the language that God uses is a mighty arm and an outstretched hand, right? So there's something about these appendages that are used in the imagery of God and gods at this time that are very powerful. This is the finger of the divine. This is the finger of God. So that's how they say, like, hey, this isn't just magic, but an access to divine power, but this is actually a higher level prophet or higher level magic divine representative than we can do. All right, Greg.
So being the finger of God and not the outstretched arm, the implication is this is something very light.
Ooh.
We haven't gotten to the full strength yet.
Good, nice, close reading there. Okay, great. All right, any other thoughts or comments? All right, let's see how far we can get through the verbs used in our portion only. So I'm going to end with the sixth plague, because that's how far our portion goes. So does any other readers want to jump in? All right, Kathy, you've been doing such a good job. Let's continue with you. All right, so now we're moving on. So now reminding us of the progression we've had Pharaoh not asking for it to be relieved, right? And refusing he stiffened his own heart, but the magicians could copy it. Then the magicians copied it, but Pharaoh asked for relief. Then we had lice, and the magicians are like, "Oh my gosh, this is really God!" But Pharaoh did not ask for relief. Now we have the ante being upped with insects. So please continue with verse 26. So 26 through 28 I've included here, so we have context for the plague of the insects.
So Moses left Pharaoh's presence and pleaded with the Lord, and the Lord did as Moses asked. He removed the swarms of insects from Pharaoh, from his courtiers, and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh became stubborn this time also, and would not let the people go.
All right, you guys seeing this pattern? We have stiffening heart when Pharaoh doesn't ask for relief, and a heavy heart, a slow heart, a stubborn heart when he's given relief, he asks for relief, and then goes back on his word. Okay, any thoughts or comments on that? Let's keep going. So the next plague we have here is now in chapter 9, verse 7, where we get to this part of it. And this is the cattle disease. So again, we have this kind of competition going on still, but about how mighty God is compared to what the priests could do.
When Pharaoh inquired, he found that not a head of livestock of Israel had died, yet Pharaoh remained stubborn.
Okay, so here we have here Pharaoh remains stubborn, which is previously associated with him changing his mind. Sorry. But here Pharaoh does not ask for relief, and yet he becomes stubborn. All right, let's again. This is not explicitly by God, but also not explicitly by Pharaoh, right? His heart became stubborn, and he would not let the people go. Okay, before we continue, Linda Miller.
Isn't this human nature that when people are backed into a corner without a place to escape, that they just sort of shut down and don't act or make it worse? And I mean, bullies are that way as well. So that's what I see here.
So he is hardening his position.
Correct.
Yes. All right.
And I think that's human nature. When people are backed into a corner, you tend to see sort of no way out without appearing to give in, which you don't want to do. Also, having never been part of Torah study before for the last couple of years, and only knowing the story from Passover story, really not reading it. I never heard the use of the word magician either. So I find that word interesting.
So when this interaction is first introduced, there's 3 different words used: the Hebrew for magician, the Hebrew for priest, and then they combine them together with a word that's translated magician priest, but it's actually the Egyptian word for the priests. So basically, in the beginning, we were kind of given by context and nice literal teaching how to understand the word for and interpret as Israelites who speak Hebrew, the word for a magician priest in Egypt, who were priests of their gods and had this magical power, which for the most part, Israelite priests probably didn't have. Yes, and so sometimes they're translated soothsayers because reading, and this is something that Israelite priests absolutely did, which is like reading different types of oracles as right. So there's different ways of doing it in the ancient world. Tea leaves is the modern way of doing it, right? So being is a soothsayer. Jim, I know it's really late there. Let me stop my share. Are you willing to share what you said directly to me before we continue? Here, let's try. There you go. Go ahead.
Okay. What I said was underlying all this is Pharaoh's heart really his brain? Thus, he is a spontaneous character and could say he shoots from the lip. This would be his first reaction to Moses's slow of speech, because he then dismisses everything that Moses tries to say or impart. And I contend that only when the firstborn of Egypt, the last plague, are killed, does Pharaoh finally realize he went too far. And at that point, there is no reconciliation.
All right. So there's some really powerful play that you can do with this confusion between heart and intellect in traditional,
exactly,
right? And that he does seem to be not thinking things through, whereas Moses, who's slow of speech, thinks things through, right? And it is a different leadership style. Okay, So we only have about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to stop our exploration of the different words because you're seeing the pattern. And what you'll see also in the sixth plague is it's the first time that God hardens Pharaoh's heart. So you have this contrast of the first 5 plagues. God never explicitly does it. And sometimes Pharaoh is explicitly the one either strengthening or hardening his own heart, or slowing down his own heart, however we interpret it, right? And becoming stubborn. And then in the last 5 plagues, God has a role. And so this also comes into the debate about free will. Like how much of this was Pharaoh's choice and how much of this was God? So what do you guys think? Steve Sloan.
I have always had a difficult time with this portion because of the way the language is translated. It does sound like God is meddling with free will. I was listening to Rabbi Foreman on this recently on Aleph Beta, and his interpretation, he made, I actually didn't listen to this portion, but I know that there's sort of a matrix where you could, for each plague, look at, was it Pharaoh or God that was doing the hardening, and which word was used? Was it strengthen or harden? And you can literally make a matrix for each of the plagues regarding that. But then the question remains, if God is the one doing the quote unquote hardening, or actually in this case strengthening, which I much prefer, it makes it much more palatable to me when we're seeing it as strengthening, that it's more of a doubling down of the direction of Pharaoh's heart rather than a changing of his character in some way. That God used human nature, which Linda had mentioned before. Pharaoh's ego. He held a mirror up to Pharaoh's own innate stubbornness in order to strengthen his heart. And that to me makes much more sense and is much more swallowable than the idea that there was some meddling with free will in here, which I don't think God did. And it's taken me years to come to even to that part where I feel somewhat settled over this whole issue of free will.
So in this interpretation, which you can base on the word strengthen that's really used, as opposed to harden, which is only really used when God talks about what God's going to do, as opposed to the actual use in the plagues. It's Pharaoh's choice and Pharaoh's personality that's just being exacerbated. God's allowing it to be exacerbated. God's encouraging Pharaoh to kind of lean in to his own personality, his own foibles, and God is taking advantage of that as opposed to imposing that,
and
which
in fact,
very different.
And in fact, in that very first plague, God takes notice that Pharaoh is stubborn.
Yes.
So it may very well be that he then is using that stubbornness in order to strengthen his direction.
Great. Other thoughts or comments or responses? Anyone not agree with Steve here? Jim, are you raising your hand? It's hard to tell with
No, sorry.
Okay, sorry. All right. So I'm going to share a couple the interpretations from tradition then, so that because everybody in all of our commentators, our rabbis struggle with this because it is conflicting. Go ahead, Steve. Before I read, want to follow up on that? Steve Sloan, you raise your hand.
No, sorry, that was
okay. So Rashi says, since this is going back again to when God is saying what's going to happen, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, right? Since Pharaoh has wickedly resisted me, and it is manifest to me that the heathen nations find no spiritual satisfaction in setting their whole heart to return to me penitently, it is better that Pharaoh's heart should be hardened in order that my signs may be multiplied against him, so that you may recognize my divine power. Such indeed is the method of the Holy One, blessed be he. God brings punishment upon the nations so that Israel may hear of it and fear God. As it is said, Zephaniah, I have cut off nations, their corners are desolate. So that's talking, again, remember the prophets are prophesying to Israel about the awful things that are going to happen to them. Surely thou wilt fear me, you will receive correction. So this is right. So you, the Israelites, will correct yourselves and return to me because you see the awful things I'm doing to the other nations. Nevertheless, so this is Rashi's source, is Yebamot, Babylonian Talmud 63a. Nevertheless, in the case of the first 5 plagues, it is not stated, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, but Pharaoh's heart was hardened. So here we have Rashi. What Rashi does, he brings up different interpretations, right? So Rashi is actually saying the opposite of what Steve just said, which is that God is saying, I will harden Pharaoh's heart in order to show my power. I will take away, implied here, his free will. I will punish Pharaoh because he has already wickedly resisted me. So it's his previous choices that are leading me to do this, to use him as an example so that the Israelites will recognize God. But then Rashi brings in this challenge, right? That of what we just seen here, which is God wasn't involved in the first 5 plagues. So Ibn Ezra says, if God hardened Pharaoh's heart, what was his transgression and what was his sin? The answer is, God granted wisdom to man and implanted in his heart the intelligence to receive power from on high, to add to his good, or to diminish his evil. So Ibn Ezra actually has 2 interpretations here that are related but different. So one is that that Pharaoh already made his choices, right? This is and not just in the first 5 plagues, but in the previous punishment of the Israelites. Now the meaning of our verse is, I will harden his heart in order to multiply my signs and my wonders. So this is a simple reading of the beginning of this chapter. And Rabbi Joshua says the meaning is, I will harden his heart so that he will be able to bear the plagues. So in other words, I will give him, this is more of the use of the word strengthen than harden. He will be strong and be able to endure the plagues. But Ibn Ezra objects to that because the heart is a seat of intelligence, not of emotion. And finally, before we leave today, and we're gonna wrap this up, I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Now we have Nachmanides, Ramban. The rabbi said in Midrash Rabbah, God revealed to Moses that he was destined to harden Pharaoh's heart in order to bring judgment upon him, for he caused them to work in cruel bondage. It is also stated in Midrash Rabbah, for I've hardened his heart. Rabbi Yochanan said, this provides a pretext for the heretics to say that God did not allow Pharaoh to repent. So right now, here, this is really important. This is now me talking, right? The rabbis recognized that if God took away Pharaoh's free will, then this is super problematic, and it opens up a doorway, in this case, for heretics to accuse God of not being just and not being a good God, right? So, so Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, the mouths of heretics be closed only if it concerneth the scorners, he scorned them. He's like, no, don't listen to them. When he warns one on 3 occasions, and he, the person who's sinning, does not turn away from his ways, God closes the door of repentance to him in order to punish him for his sin. So here is the answer of Shimon ben Lakish, that Pharaoh had 3 chances already. Such was the case with wicked Pharaoh. After the Holy One, blessed be he, sent him 5 times the request to let his people go with the 5 plagues, and he paid no attention to his words. The Holy One, blessed be he, said, you have stiffened your neck, which is the phrase used for the Israelites all the time, and hardened your heart. I will double your defilement. And also what he's playing on here is that the word for I will harden his heart is also the word associated with a stiff-necked. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share here. Greg.
Just if the heart is the seat of intellect and rationality, but not emotion, where is the seat of emotion in this view?
The guts. So, but I'm happy to be correct in that. But that is my my understanding is, in your belly, in your guts is where emotion is, which is often what we feel, right? Yes, Kishka is exactly right, David. So, okay. So here we have, what I'm trying to raise for you is that our rabbis wrestled with these questions. They didn't have great answers, because if you say that God hardened Pharaoh's heart in order that Israel would recognize that God was God, or that Pharaoh and the Egyptians would recognize the power of God, and that God was powerful and potentially even the one God, it creates all sorts of issues with our belief in a just and one God. And so some of what they do is they pull, as Steve Sloan did for us today, and argue that Pharaoh made choices. But on the other hand, you could equally read this text and say that Pharaoh didn't make choices. And that is in that place of, as Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg says, narrative that God is a just God who freed the Israelites from torture and enslavement, and counter narrative that God took away Pharaoh's free will. It's in that place of unsettled theology that we constantly sit with this text. And it is, I think the strength of this text that we don't read it simply through the lenses of the rabbis who give us the easy answer, or at least the answer that absolves God of guilt, that can actually be read in this text, which Steve articulated so well. That's there, but balanced against it is this lack of clarity. And that demands that we continue to wrestle with the words of Torah, to return to this every year and doubt and question and struggle with it. And it is in that struggle that we can find empathy, that we can learn to listen to the cries of distress of the Egyptians, and that we can hopefully turn our own hearts and intellect, our own lev and whichever way you understand that, to the struggles of other people and have empathy for them as well. So I think that's a perfect note on which to start our new year, our new secular year. Shana Tova, happy secular new year. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining me in Torah study this morning.
Thank you, Rabbi. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.